Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan. I'm a designer here at Shopify. I've got my Twitter handle on the screen there. Feel free to reach out to me afterwards.
Hey, I'm Dominic. I'm a lead front-end developer also at Shopify, and my Twitter handle is also there, and I'd be happy to talk more afterwards as well.
And we both work at Shopify, of course, on Polaris. And so Polaris is what we'll be talking about today. Let's take a look. So what is Polaris? Polaris is Shopify's design system. So it's a set of guidelines and code for implementing them. It gives us a common language for talking about interfaces and common tools for building them. And it helps everyone at Shopify work together to create a great experience for all of our merchants. For you, our partners, it means that you get our expertise to build Shopify apps faster. Your apps will fit in seamlessly with the rest of Shopify, and your customers, they'll thank you too, because right out of the gate, they'll have something that's familiar to them and that they kind of know already how to use. So today we're going to be focused mostly on writing code, getting started building with Polaris. But before we get into that, I just wanted to point out that Polaris is more than just a library of components. There are sections on the Polaris site, you can see them here, on like how to make high-level sort of product decisions and how to write good interface copy and how our visual language works. So you should grab a copy sometime and check these out. Oh, and we have this resources section as well, where you can find downloads and the link to the Polaris repo on GitHub. All right, so let me just switch over here and I'll show you what we're going to build today. So this is a page from an imaginary drop shipping app we've made up. We've called it Dropship with 2 P's because internet. And so we'll pretend that this is a standalone Shopify app, one that lives inside its own browser tab. And of course, you can also build Shopify apps with Polaris that are embedded, like right directly inside the Shopify admin. But today we're just going to focus on building this as if it was a standalone app. And I've put together this mock-up actually in Sketch, the drawing app for the Mac. We actually provide you a UI kit built for Sketch that you can download from that resources section of the Polaris website. And the Sketch UI kit gives you all of the Polaris components, as well as things like the color palette and text styles. And so, you know, when I was putting this together, the UI kit just made it a lot faster for me to sort of work out how I wanted to build this page. So let's take a look at what's the rest of what's here. It's a pretty simple but sort of like classic settings form for Shopify. So let's get coding. So I'm just going to go to the component section of the Shopify website and the getting started section. So as you can see here, we give you 2 options for getting Polaris. All of the React components are available through our NPM package. And we also provide you with a CSS file that allows you to build just using plain HTML. So let's get started this way with the plain CSS components. And I'm just going to create like a good old-fashioned web page. So I'm going to fire up my editor here. Let's see, actually, I'm going to open this from the terminal. Cool, okay. And speaking of editors, like I'm using Microsoft's VS Code, but any editor will do. And I'm just going to create a new index.html file here. And I'm just going to start with some boilerplate responsive HTML. Standard stuff, I've got a language attribute, some meta tags, including something to make the viewport responsive. And I put in a title for our app. Excellent. But I don't have a style sheet yet. So I'm going to jump back to the Polaris website. And I'm just going to copy this link tag, which will grab the current version of the Polaris CSS from our CDN, which will make it a nice and fast download. And I'm just going to paste it into our HTML file. All right, so what's next? Let's go and take a look at the list of components that the Polaris website provides. And since I just have like an empty page right now, I need something for this like outer structure of the page. So let's look at structure here and the page component. So I think this one's pretty well named. It's for building the outer structure, outer wrapper of a page, including the page title and the associated actions. So I'm going to scroll down here and take a look at the example. So this is an example that shows pretty much everything that you can do with this page component. This header area is the sort of visible part of it. It also controls like the side margins of the page. And in our mockup, you'll remember that we just have the title, so it's just the settings. I don't need most of the rest of this stuff. So I'm actually going to make use of a nifty feature of the Polaris website here, which is these interactive playgrounds. And I'm actually just gonna, this is in React, but I'm just gonna make use of it here to get rid of the stuff that I don't want. No, we don't need actions or secondary actions or pagination. And we just want it to say settings. Cool. But we're not working with React, so I'm just going to toggle this, this HTML mode here, and it's going to give me the markup that I need for just a plain HTML page. Switch back to my editor, paste in this markup, and now let's see what we've got. Just going to drag this straight in here. Boom, there we go. So you can see the page has its margins in place and background color and typography is there for the title. So everything's working. It's exactly what we want. For now, let's take a look at the rest of the page. So going back to the design, we have this, like I said, this sort of classic Shopify settings layout with the headings on the left and the content on the right. And as you can imagine, this is something we can do using the layout component. So I'm going to go back to the docs page, and this particular example, this particular style of layout, I mean, layout. So this particular style of page layout is called annotated layout because there's sort of annotations on the headings here. And I'm going to adjust the copy to match what our mockup says. So I'm just going to fill this in. And our mockup has like some different content inside the card. Like we've got some form fields in here and we had something different in there. So I'm just going to empty out this card. And again, switch back to HTML mode. Copy this. And I'm just going to put it in the page content here instead of that placeholder. Reload, and there we go. Nice. So now we're going to replace the empty card here with a component from Polaris called account connection. Let's go take a look at that. So this component is used to connect the app that we're building to a third-party service. So in this case, we're connecting the merchant's Shopify store to their sort of imaginary dropship account. So let's check out the example here. And there's not much here we need to customize except the name of the app. So I'm gonna type that in. And here, and here. And I would put like a real URL in here, so I'm just gonna put in a placeholder for now. Switch back to HTML mode, I'm gonna copy the code. And then here, in place of this empty card, just paste that in. Excellent, and reload. There we go. We have something that looks pretty great, but if I click connect here, of course, it doesn't really do anything. If we wanted to make this interactive, we need to write some JavaScript. If we switch back to the code here, you will, of course, notice that there's a fair amount of markup here that goes into these components. And some of that comes from the component philosophy itself, this idea of having discrete building blocks that do one thing well and that you can combine together. So you notice that some of the components, like the account connection component, is actually made up of several other more primitive Polaris components, like there's an actual card, but there's also this setting action component and this component called stack that I'll explain a little bit more about later. But the markup that we provide is also important in some cases for accessibility. So we do things like put the right ARIA attributes and things on some components to make sure that they're available to everyone, including people using screen readers. So even if you don't use the React version of these components, you don't have to write out all of this HTML by hand. You can use whatever tools your language or framework provides to dry this out. So as long as you output the right markup, you're good. But at Shopify, we love React. So we provide React versions of all of these components, and they'll give you a little bit more out of the box, and they give you a more convenient API for working with the components. So instead of playing with the playground and then switching to the HTML, you can actually just work with that simpler API as your primary way of working, writing your own code. So Dom, why don't you show us how we do this in React?
That would be my pleasure. So like Ryan said earlier, we distribute the React components as a handy NPM package. So I'm going to walk you through creating a new React app, importing the Polaris component package into that app, and then starting to build out our page and match that mockup that he showed. So to do this, first you'll need Node.js installed, which comes with the NPM package manager. So if you haven't used it before, you don't have it installed, you can go to nodejs.org. They have downloaded installation instructions there. Cool, so we'll assume you've done that already though. So the first thing we need to do is install the Create React App package. So Create React App is a package that Facebook distributes for setting up a really simple boilerplate React app. So I'm going to install that here. So we do npm install -g create React app. And we use the -g because we want it to be installed globally, not just to the project we're in. So we're going to run that. It'll install from npm. And when that's done, we're actually going to use that command we just installed, so create React app, to generate a new project. So create React app, and we're going to call this dropship React. So what this is going to do now is generate a bunch of files and configuration, as well as all the packages and dependencies needed to start a new React app. So it gives you some really good defaults out of the box, but you can actually do a lot with the configuration they give you as well. So I would recommend going through Facebook's Create React App documentation. So we'll just be scratching the basics today, but there's tons in here, and they actually give you the ability to do what they call ejecting too. So if you find that the configuration that they're giving you doesn't do enough, you can always eject and then provide your own Webpack configuration or change whatever you might want. So if you want to use CSS modules or Sass, you can configure that yourself as well. So we'll just wait for that to finish installing. Looks like it's installing the packages now. Cool, so now we'll see some output, and it gives you a few commands that we can run. So how to start your server, how to build for production, how to run your tests, and untitled check I was just talking about. We're really only going to use the npm start right now. So first I'm going to change into the new project we just created, and then I'm going to run npm start. So what this does is starts the development server. It'll actually open it up in a new tab for you automatically, and it'll show you the basic app. So this is all we have so far, is just this landing page that they provide with the little spinning React logo. So let's actually open up what they just generated and take a look at what's inside. So I'm going to open this up in my code editor. Let's just look at the folder structure. So it's pretty simple. We have a package.json, which just lists some of the dependencies, so React and React DOM. There's a public folder which has the main index file. Then the source directory is actually where most of the code lives. So there's a few things in here, but we're mostly going to be just focused on this app.js. This is the main React component that's being rendered. So you'll see here it's the content that is shown on the page. So this is actually where most of the magic is happening right now. So next, let's actually go back to our terminal, and we're going to install the Polaris package. So to do that, we're going to do npm install -- save. So this will save it to our package.json file at Shopify/Polaris. So this is going to pull in all of our components and have them available within our project. So while that's installing, let's actually jump back to the Polaris website, and we're going to go look up that page documentation again, because we're going to build out that same thing that Ryan was just doing in the static HTML. So we'll pick our example. Again, we don't need to be very complicated, so I'm actually going to get rid of some of these. Change this to settings. And I'm going to copy this in. Cool, so it looks like that finished. So let's start up our server again. Start. Excellent. So we're actually going to delete some of this code here. We don't really need what they have, so we don't need that logo they provided us or this markup. So let's just paste our page component right in here. And then to use it, we actually need to import it from the Polaris package as well. So let's go back up to the top here, and we're going to import the page component from Shopify Polaris. So what this does is say we just want the page component. We don't want the rest of the components right now, just that one single one. So we'll save that. Wait for this to update. Cool, so we're seeing our content being output, but there still isn't any styles being applied. So we don't have the right typography or background that we were seeing before. So because the Create React app is based on Webpack, you can actually import CSS into your JavaScript files, and it will include it in the bundle automatically for you. So we're going to import Shopify/Polaris /styles.css. So this is the main style sheet for Polaris, and includes all the styles we need. We'll save that again. There we go. You see we now get the correct margins, typography styles, and background. You also notice that it live updated. I didn't need to go refresh the browser tab. That's something that's built in with Create React app. Cool. So everything in React is a component, and that's why we feel it works really well with the mental model about how we think about Polaris and how we think about our design system. So you can easily import these components like Polaris, but you can also easily create your own components. So we're actually going to create a new component to house the main form. So we're going to call this file settings form. So settingsform.js. And then there's a few things we need to do for a new React component. First, we have to import React and the component class from React. And then we're going to create a new class. So we're going to call this class settingsform to match the file name we chose. And we have to make it extend that base React component. So extends component, the one we just imported. And then inside this class, we really only need one method, and that's the render method. So this is the method that's going to handle actually returning the JSX or or markup that you want rendered from that component. So to start, let's just put in the method and we'll return an empty div just to start, just as a placeholder. Oops. Great. And then we need to export this class. So we're going to export default settings form. Cool, so that's the basics of a component in React. Now let's do the layout that we wanted within that. So we're going to go back to the Polaris website and look up the layout component that we used earlier. Again, we're going to use the annotated layout example. And I'm just going to copy this in. I'm going to replace that div we just added. And I'm going to customize this again. So connected user, and we want this to say that. Just customize these properties being set in. And then we're going to delete this card because we don't need that. We're going to use the account connection component as well. So let's save that. Oh yeah, but we still need to do one thing. We can't actually use this layout component because we don't have it imported into this new component we're building. So let's import layout like we did for page in the other file from Shopify /Polaris. There we go. And let's save. So we're not actually going to see anything yet because we haven't actually rendered that component. So it's not actually going to show up in the browser tab. So let's go back to our app.js, and we're actually going to import that component just like we did with the page component from Polaris. So we're going to import settings form from settings form. Save. And then the way you actually call this component in your JSX is you just use it like any other JSX tag. So we can actually just call settings form within here. Doesn't need any options. Save. And there we go. We've got our annotated layout showing up. Great. So let's actually go back to the account connection component now. So go back to the site. Copy the example they have here. We're going to go back to our settings form, and we're going to put this inside of our layout annotated section. Format that. Just change the copy to match what we want. Great. Save. We have to import those components as well. So I'm actually going to break this up into a few lines just so it's a bit easier to read. So we have layout, we have account connection, and we have link. We're going to import all three of those. Great. So now we basically have what we had in the static markup. But if you look at the code we used, it's actually a lot simpler and a lot easier to read. But it still doesn't actually do anything. So still, when we click that connect button, nothing happens. So this is where we need to start tracking some state within our component. Now, state is a big part of how React works and how it knows how to render things. It's actually a very complicated topic too, so there's a lot deeper you can go on it. We're just going to scratch the surface, but I would suggest going and reading up on it and finding out some of the other ways that people manage state too. So let's go back to our settings form, and what we need to do is set a state variable. So React lets you keep track of state in a property on the class instance. So we're going to add a constructor here. So a constructor is run when you create a new instance of a class, and we're going to pass the props. So the props are the options passed along with when you call a component. So the like title and description on the annotated section, these are the props for the annotated section component. And then we need to call super with those props. So what that does is calls the parent class component with that. And then we're going to set some initial state. So this.state, this is where it stores the state object. And the state object is actually just a plain JavaScript object. So we're going to do that and add a new property for connected. And this is where we're going to track whether the account connection has been connected or not yet. And we're going to default that to false because we want to start disconnected. Oops. There we go, just a typo. Cool, so now we have that storing that state, but we need to actually be able to change it as well. So this will default to false, but it's never going to change from that. So what we're going to do is write a new method. Let's go down under our render here. And we're going to call this toggle connection. And what this is going to do is take the state for connected and invert it. So if it was false, we want it to change it to true. If it's true, we want to change it to false. So we don't actually modify this.state object directly. React provides you with a method called setState. That is the proper way to actually change a state variable. And that's because you need to tell React that you're changing the state so that it knows to re-render if it needs to. So we do this.setState, and then you can pass a plain JavaScript object into setState, and it will update any of the properties that are passed in. But you can also pass a callback, and this is important when you're actually mutating something based on the previous state, because React batches set state calls and they resolve asynchronously, so you don't know if you can actually rely on the value of this.state at that point when it's run. So what we're going to do is pass a callback into here with the connected states, this is whatever it is currently when it resolves. And we're going to take it and change it to the inverse of whatever it was. So we're going to do not connected. Connected is equal to not connected. Great. So pretty simple function, just changes it from true to false whenever you call this. So that will change the state variable. We still need to use that variable to change our output somehow. So this markup is always static right now. It's not based on that. So to make this variable based on whatever that state is set to, we're going to create a new method here, and we're going to call that account connection markup. So this method is going to decide whether it should output the connected state for the account connection component or the disconnected state for the account connection component. So we're going to do that by returning based on that variable, so this.state.connected. And then we're going to use a ternary operator here because it's a little bit easier to read when you have a bunch of markup. And then in the connected state, we want to pass a few different props to that account connection component. So I'm just going to paste this in and we can go through them. So we have the account connection component, but we also pass an avatar URL. So this would be the user's avatar for whoever was connected, the account name, some details, and then the action here, we want to say disconnect instead of connect. And this on action is the callback that will be called whenever you press the button within the account connection. So whenever you press this, the on action would be called. And so we're just going to make it call our toggle connection method that we wrote up here. But it's important to remember that you have to bind to this, and that's because we need access to the instance of the component we're in to be able to access this.setState. If you don't do that, you won't actually have the right instance of this there. And then we pass in the connected prop. So whatever the value of connected is, we're going to pass into that connected prop. And then for the disconnected state, we're just going to use what we had already. So we're just going to put that down here. Going to copy that on action that we have and put that in after the connect, and then also pass that connected prop as well. All right, so we have that, and now we actually need to call this function in our render method. So inside of here, we can do this dot account connection markup and run it. Great, so we have it displaying. Click connect, we get the connected state. We click disconnect, we get it back to the disconnected state. So now we have just that simple state variable, but it's toggling all the markup within this. So state can be complicated, but there is a few things you can do just to make it a little bit easier. So now that we know a bit about how that works, Ryan, why don't you take a crack at building out the rest of this form?
All right, let me see what I can do. So let's go back and take a look at the design. So you can see here that we have the additional sections of this page are broken up into a couple of additional annotated sections, and there's some cards inside there to hold our form fields. So I'm going to add those form field next, those just the scaffolding for this next, like annotated sections and some empty cards. So let's go back to here and make sure that my server is running. Excellent. Okay, so this is what we had. This is what Dom just built out. So now let's go back to this code. And we're in the settings form. And we have everything set up, right? So let's just add some annotated sections. And we're selling and shipping in this first section. The description from our mockup. And I'm going to put in a card. And the cards are, we've got products and we have pricing rules and shipping. So those really look the same. I'm just gonna jump ahead. Close out this annotated section. And then I'm going to add the last one. So let's see what that looks like. Oh, yeah, I see what I did. These have to actually be inside the layout component. Oh, right, I need the card component. There we go, that looks better. So the last thing I need to do here to make this an actual form is to wrap everything here in a form tag. This is another one of these things that if you're working with just JavaScript, you could get away with, but there's actually some important accessibility advantages you get by actually using a real form. All right, cool. So I remember from the box that the product card contains like a single checkbox, nice and simple. So I'm going to add a checkbox component. I'm going to remember to import this beforehand this time. So I'm going to import checkbox from Polaris, and then I'm going to use it here. Checkbox. And the checkbox has a label prop. And this particular checkbox is about automatically publishing products to Shopify when you add them in dropship. So I'm going to add some help text to explain that, because it might not be apparent to merchants right away. And then I'm going to follow the mock and just have this be checked. So let's take a look. There we go. Everything's already re-rendered and it looks great. But if I check this, I click it, nothing is happening. And you might think that's a bit weird. I mean, after all, isn't there just a plain old HTML checkbox hiding in there? And yes, the way we've implemented our checkbox, there is a plain regular HTML checkbox inside there. But because this is React, React's taken control of the rendering process. And in order to get the benefits of React and state, we need to do things a little bit differently. So React works best when our UI is a pure expression of our components plus the application state. Otherwise, our UI can easily become out of sync with the state, and when that happens, we get bugs. So similar to what we did with the account connection component, we need a way for merchants to click on this checkbox to actually affect the application state. Once the state changes, we can let React automatically re-render the UI to reflect that action. So let's add something to track the state of our checkbox. So I'll go up here to our state, and I'll add a property to this, just a plain old JavaScript object. So let's call this auto publish, and we'll make this actually false to start. We'll also need a class method to toggle the state, similar to the account connection component. And this isn't limited to toggling. I'm actually going to make this generic enough so that it can handle the input of any of the form components that we're going to build here. So I'm going to call this handle input change. And it's going to be a method that takes the name of the key in the state that I want to change. I'm just going to call that field. And it is going to return a function. And that function will be passed the value of the form field that is being changed. And so I'm going to call this set state. And I'm going to give it, I'm going to say to update the field key in the state with the value coming, the new value that's coming from the input. So we have our new key in storage, or in state to store this, and we have a handler. Now we just need to make use of it in the checkbox. So I'm going to, instead of this being permanently checked, I'm going to make this based on our state, auto publish. And I'm going to say on change, we're going to call this handle input change. And I'm going to say to update the auto publish key. Cool. So now if we go back, I changed this to be unchecked by default. So now if I click it, yes, it changes. That's great. We have a checkbox that works. And the rest of the form can be built up in much the same way. We can add components for form fields that Polaris provides. You can see those in the section here for forms. We've got a number of different form fields that you can use. And then what we need to do is once they're there, we just need to hook them up by having their state come from this state or this dot state and having their updates go through our handle input change method. So I'm just looking at how much time we have left in the webinar today. So I'm just going to jump ahead to the completed form, and we can review what we end up with. There we go. And here we go. So we have all the fields built out, and they're interactive. So I can change things like this. I can edit the text. I can change these radio buttons, and everything's going to be reflected in our state object. So now let's go back to the code and see what that looks like. So we have our different annotated sections with some things in them. And just to review the components I've used up to this point, we've got the account connection component, the card component, checkbox, choice list. Choice list is a a simple way to build a set of radio buttons. Form layout, heading, layout, link, stack, and these other ones here too. So I'm gonna just call special attention to a couple of these that I think are important. So we used down here, I'm just gonna, let's see these side by side. So in this pricing rules card, I used the stack component to lay out this row of text and input components. So stack is used for sort of doing this kind of horizontal arrangement of things and having it be responsive by default. So that's what I use to do that. It automatically puts the right spacing in between. You can control things like alignment and how things are like arranged inside there. And in the shipping card, I used a different component for a similar purpose. So this form layout component, I used that to wrap around the checkbox and text field to give them the right amount of spacing vertically in between them. So that you can use that for more complex forms as well, with like a bunch of different form fields that you want to give spacing to. And there's some other options in there for doing sort of more complicated form layouts. So you should check that out as well. Finally, in the reporting card at the bottom here, I have used the visually hidden component to wrap a heading. And I did this so that people using screen readers who are visually impaired, for example, can still see that there's a title for this card, even though I don't really need to show it visually. There's only one thing in this card. So that's really important. At Shopify, we really care about accessibility and making sure that everyone can access our apps, and we want to give you the tools so you can do the same. All right, so let's see. The very last thing we need to do is add some way to save this form. So we don't have a submit button or anything right now. So let's go back to our design and see what that should look like. Yeah, so we've got a save button down here at the bottom. And for this, we're going to use the page actions component, which that is for this exact purpose, for providing key actions at the bottom of a page. So let's go take a look at that. And we really just need the primary action. I'm going to copy that. And actually, I'm going to put it inside the layout, and I'm going to wrap it in a regular layout section. This ensures that it gets the right amount of spacing with respect to the rest of the form. And it says save. I'm also going to make it a submit button by passing the submit prop with a true value. Save that. I'm also going to have our form itself respond to the submit action or submit event. I'm going to say this handle form submit. Find this for similar reasons to what Dom mentioned earlier. And now I just have to implement that handle form submit. Implement that method. So handle form submit is going to be a method that takes an event. And I'm just going to do something really simple here. I'm going to prevent default on that event so that we can handle it ourselves. And I'm just going to console log the state. because I made this, I called this as a bound function, I can access this state. Oh, right. Import page actions. Now if I open my console and click save, yes, you can see it logged the state object. And so this is where you could, you know, in a more complete example, you could have your app submit the state to the server via Ajax or whatever your app needs to do. All right. Dom, do you want to help wrap us up here?
Yeah, so there we go. That's using Polaris components in React. And like I mentioned earlier, we're really only scratching the surface here. In a real app, you'd have to handle things like the form submission Ryan just talked about, the authentication, actually pull in real data into that account connection component. But I hope this gives you a good head start on how to build the interface side of it. And we really hope we've convinced you to give React a shot and using Polaris with React.
But yeah, let's keep the conversation going on Twitter and on the GitHub repo. Thanks very much for everyone for coming. And we just wanted to plug the next webinar, which is coming up Thursday, August 10th. And it's going to be called Dirty Little Tricks from the Dark Corners of E-commerce. So look forward to that.
Great. Thank you, everybody.